The water didn't disappear all at once. That would have been easier to accept, easier to forgive. Instead, it lingered, just long enough to deceive you. A dark patch spreading across the soil, promising life, whispering nourishment, before vanishing into nothing. You watched it happen, again and again, gallons slipping away like a quiet theft. No resistance, no gratitude from the roots below, just absorption without memory. You thought you were feeding your plants. You were feeding something else, something deeper, something unseen. And the worst part? It's been happening for years, maybe decades, maybe your entire life. Now slow down, step away from the hose, from the ritual you inherited without question. Imagine a garden that drinks differently, not from the surface, not from your hands, but from something buried, something intentional, something so simple it feels like a trick or a secret you were never supposed to find. If you've ever felt that quiet suspicion that gardening shouldn't be this wasteful, this exhausting, this blind, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe and stay with me, because what you're about to uncover isn't just a technique. It's a rebellion against everything you've been taught about watering, roots, and control. There is always an enemy in every system that pretends to be natural. In modern gardening, it wears a polite face. It calls itself efficiency. It sells you hoses with precision nozzles, sprinklers that spin like obedient machines, irrigation timers that promise control down to the minute. But beneath that polished surface lives a quieter force, one that thrives on your ignorance. The belief that water belongs above the soil, the assumption that roots will find their way, the inherited ritual of pouring life onto a surface that was never designed to hold it. Long before plastic tubing and synthetic fertilizers, there were gardeners who understood something we have forgotten. In ancient Japan, particularly during the Edo period, small-scale farmers and temple caretakers practiced a method so unassuming it rarely earned a name outside its region. It was not documented in grand agricultural manuals or exported as a revolutionary technique. It simply existed, embedded in daily practice, passed from hand to hand, season to season. Unglazed clay vessels were buried beside crops, their porous walls acting as a silent interface between stored water and thirsty roots. There were no schedules, no surface watering, just a slow, invisible exchange happening beneath the soil line where the real conversation of life takes place. What makes this more unsettling is not that the method worked, it's that it worked too well, too efficiently. Water was not lost to evaporation. It was not scattered by wind or stolen by shallow-rooted weeds. It moved with intention, drawn outward only when the surrounding soil demanded it. The plant itself became the signal. The root zone dictated the flow. In a world obsessed with control, this system surrendered it and achieved something closer to precision than any modern device could replicate. So why did this knowledge fade into obscurity? Because it didn't scale the way industry needed it to. You cannot mass-produce patience. You cannot monetize a system that asks the gardener to trust the soil instead of dominating it. As agricultural markets expanded and urbanization reshaped land use, efficiency became synonymous with speed and volume. Sprinklers covered more ground. Drip lines promised uniformity. Chemical fertilizers compensated for shallow root systems that surface watering encouraged. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the older methods were dismissed, not because they failed, but because they refused to conform. There is no conspiracy written in official records, no single moment where someone decided to erase this approach. But there is a pattern, a quiet bias toward methods that can be packaged, sold, and standardized. Techniques that require observation, restraint, and a kind of humility toward nature tend to vanish, not dramatically, but through neglect. They are labeled primitive, inefficient, outdated, until one day they are simply gone. And yet, fragments remain. In remote villages, in forgotten gardens behind aging temples, in the hands of individuals who never abandoned the rhythm of soil and water as a partnership rather than a transaction. What they preserved was not just a technique, but a philosophy, that roots do not chase water blindly. They respond to it. That soil is not a passive medium, but an active participant, and that sometimes the most powerful systems are the ones you cannot see working at all. The industry will never tell you this. It cannot afford to. Because if you understand how water truly moves through soil, if you realize that most of what you pour onto your garden never reaches its intended destination, then the entire structure begins to crack. The tools you rely on start to feel excessive. The routines begin to look wasteful. And the idea that more input equals better results starts to collapse under its own weight. This is where the forgotten method waits, not as a relic, not as nostalgia, but as a quiet challenge, a question buried just beneath the surface. What if everything you've been taught about watering is not wrong, but incomplete? To understand why this buried method feels almost unnatural at first, you have to confront a deeper illusion, the idea that water moves through soil the way we see it move across the surface. We imagine downward flow, gravity, pulling moisture straight into the earth, roots passively waiting below like open mouths. But that image is a lie of perspective. The real movement of water underground is slower, stranger, and far more selective. Soil is not a uniform substance. It is a fractured landscape of particles, air pockets, microbial colonies, and microscopic channels that behave more like a living network than an inert medium. When you pour water onto the surface, most of it doesn't travel evenly downward. It follows the path of least resistance, slipping through cracks, bypassing entire zones of root activity, sometimes plunging too deep, other times evaporating before it can even enter the system. What appears to be saturation is often just a temporary illusion, a thin layer of moisture masking a deeper dryness. Now imagine reversing that process. Instead of forcing water from above, you place it directly within the soil profile, inside a porous container that does not release its contents freely, but negotiates with the environment. This is where the physics shifts. The unglazed clay acts as a semi-permeable boundary, responding not to gravity alone, but to tension. Specifically, to the difference in moisture between the inside of the vessel and the surrounding soil. When the soil is dry, it creates a kind of suction force, what scientists call matrix potential. This force pulls water outward through the microscopic pores of the clay, not in streams, not in droplets, but in a slow, continuous migration that matches the demand of the soil itself. As the surrounding earth becomes more hydrated, that pull weakens and the flow nearly stops. The system regulates itself, not through sensors or timers, but through the physics of balance. Roots, in this environment, behave differently. Instead of spreading shallow and wide in search of surface moisture, they begin to orient themselves toward the consistent, stable source below. They grow deeper, thicker, more resilient. The plant is no longer reacting to sporadic flooding followed by drought. It is living within a steady gradient of availability. Stress decreases, efficiency increases, and something subtle begins to change in the plant's physiology. Its relationship with water becomes proactive rather than reactive. There is another layer to this, one that modern systems rarely account for. When you eliminate surface watering, you also disrupt the life cycle of opportunistic weeds and certain pests. Many of these organisms depend on moisture near the topsoil to germinate or thrive. By shifting hydration downward, you are not just feeding your plants, you are selectively starving their competitors. The garden becomes quieter, less chaotic, more intentional. And then there is evaporation, the silent thief. Under conventional watering, a significant portion of what you apply never even enters the soil. Heat, wind, and sunlight reclaim it almost instantly. But when water is stored beneath the surface, shielded by layers of earth, that loss is dramatically reduced. Every drop has a purpose. Every movement is directed. This is why the method feels too good to be true, because it operates on principles that are rarely explained in everyday gardening. It does not rely on more water, more effort, or more control. It relies on alignment between soil physics, plant biology, and a simple material that has existed for centuries without modification. And yet, once you see it clearly, it becomes difficult to unsee. The waste, the inefficiency, the constant cycle of overwatering and neglect. You begin to realize that the problem was never your dedication or your technique. It was the direction. Water was always moving the wrong way. The first time you do it, It feels almost ceremonial, not because the act itself is complicated, but because it forces you to slow down in a way modern gardening rarely allows. You begin with a simple, unglazed clay vessel, nothing polished, nothing coated, nothing that would interfere with its ability to breathe. It feels rough in your hands, porous, imperfect, alive in a way plastic never is. You choose a spot beside your plant, not directly at its base, but close enough that its future roots will sense what lies beneath. Then you dig. Not aggressively, not as if you're breaking the soil open, but as if you're making space for something that belongs there. The earth gives way differently when you approach it with patience. Layers reveal themselves, texture changes, the smell deepens, richer, almost damp even when it's dry. When the hole is ready, you lower the vessel into place, leaving only its narrow neck exposed above the surface. This detail matters more than it seems. The buried body becomes a reservoir hidden from heat and wind, while the opening remains accessible, an interface between you and the system you've just created. You fill it with water slowly, listening to the faint, almost inaudible shift as liquid meets clay. And then, you stop. No spraying, no soaking the surrounding soil, no reassurance from visible wetness, just a quiet trust that something is happening where you cannot see it. This is the moment most people fail. The instinct to water from above returns like a reflex, a deeply conditioned response. You want proof, you want immediacy. But this method offers neither. It offers something else, something slower, but far more precise. Over the next few days, subtle changes begin to emerge. The soil surface remains deceptively dry, almost unchanged, while below, a gradient of moisture forms around the vessel. Roots, sensing this consistent source, begin to shift their growth patterns. They move inward, downward, exploring with intention rather than desperation. The plant responds not with sudden bursts, but with a steadiness that feels unfamiliar at first. Leaves hold their structure longer under heat. Growth becomes more balanced, less erratic. There was a man in New Mexico, Daniel Reyes, who had spent years fighting the desert with conventional methods. He watered daily, sometimes twice, watching as much of it vanished into the air or sank beyond reach. When he first buried clay vessels among his tomato rows, he expected modest improvement at best. What he observed instead unsettled him. Within a single season, his water usage dropped by nearly 70%, yet his yield increased. Not dramatically at first glance, but in quality. Firmer fruit, deeper color, longer harvest windows. The plants weren't just surviving, they were stabilizing. In Northern California, a small community garden overseen by a woman named Lila Morgan experimented with the same approach during a particularly dry year. Restrictions had limited their water access to a fraction of what they once had. Desperation pushed them to try what many dismissed as an old-world trick. By mid-season, while neighboring plots struggled with wilting and inconsistent growth, their beds held a quiet resilience. Measurements taken by a local extension group showed soil moisture levels remaining stable for days longer than conventionally watered areas. The difference wasn't loud, it didn't announce itself, but it was undeniable. The ritual becomes simpler with repetition. Refill the vessel every few days, depending on heat and plant demand. Observe, but do not interfere. Let the system regulate itself. There is a strange kind of discipline in doing less, in resisting the urge to correct what does not need correction. You begin to realize that most of your previous effort was not improving the system. It was compensating for its flaws, and slowly, almost without noticing, your relationship with the garden shifts. You stop thinking in terms of input and output, of control and response. You start thinking in terms of balance, of signals, of quiet exchanges happening beneath your feet. Because this was never just about watering. It was about where you place your trust, in the surface, where everything is visible and misleading, or below, where the real work has always been happening. There is a moment, if you stay with this long enough, when the technique stops feeling like a technique at all. It becomes a lens, a way of seeing not just your garden, but the quiet mechanics of everything that grows, everything that endures. Because what you buried in the soil was never just a clay vessel filled with water. It was a decision to stop reacting to the surface and start trusting what happens beneath it. We are conditioned to believe that more effort creates more life, more water, more intervention, more control. But the garden, when you listen closely, tells a different story. It rewards restraint. It thrives on precision that doesn't announce itself. And it punishes excess in ways that are easy to miss until the damage is already done. The forgotten Japanese method exposes this contradiction with almost uncomfortable clarity. It shows you that the problem was never scarcity. It was direction. It was misunderstanding. And once you see that, it becomes difficult to go back, not just in gardening, but in how you approach systems that seem broken or inefficient. You begin to question where else you are pouring energy onto the surface, mistaking visibility for impact. Where else you are feeding something unseen, something unintended, simply because it feels like action. But there is a warning hidden here as well. This method is not a shortcut. It is not a hack designed to give you instant results with minimal thought. If you approach it that way, it will disappoint you, because its power comes from alignment, not exploitation. It asks you to observe, to adjust, to let go of the constant need to intervene. And in a world built on urgency and control, that can feel like the hardest discipline of all. There is a larger secret embedded in this, one that most people will never notice because they are too focused on the outcome. The real transformation does not happen in the plant. It happens in you, in the way you begin to trust processes you cannot see, in the patience you develop when results are no longer immediate, in the quiet confidence that comes from understanding how something works at its root, rather than trying to dominate it from above. And this is only the beginning, because what you've uncovered here, this buried exchange between clay, water, and root, is just one fragment of a much older system. A system that extends beyond irrigation, beyond soil, into patterns of growth that have been observed, refined, and, in many cases, deliberately overlooked. There are methods that shape how roots communicate, techniques that influence how plants defend themselves without chemicals, entire frameworks of cultivation that operate beneath the threshold of modern attention. In the next video, we're going to step deeper into that hidden layer, into a practice that doesn't just feed plants, but teaches them to become something stronger, something more self-sufficient than anything you've likely seen in a modern garden. Until then, remember this: the surface is loud. It demands your attention. It convinces you that what you see is all there is. But life, real, enduring life, is built in silence below.